It's quite a story. I was very excited about my investigation of harmaline. I obtained some harmaline from what laboratory? I don't remember now. Merck. So they had this leftover harmaline, which I did all my research on. And my subjects, who knew nothing of what they were taking, they didn't know it was a tropical plant. They didn't know it was a substance contained in ayahuasca. They didn't know about ayahuasca. I had recruited volunteers who were willing to lend themselves to this experiment of taking something unknown to them and reporting their effect. So under these circumstances, it was very impressive. About a third of them saw snakes, about a third of them saw tigers. Every now and then I had glimpses of dragons reported. I was very intrigued of this, and mostly I settled on the idea of the collective unconscious, on an area and a region of the mind, a region very much connected to primitive instinct, but this mode of expression of imagery instead of impulse, instinctual behavior, was something quite special. I was very impressed with the healing effects of this harmaline. Harmaline by itself was not always impressive enough. Sometimes it generally needs some admixture to come alive, to deliver its message, to become experientially or feeling-wise more interesting, not just images. I was invited together with Irineo Rossier, a French priest who had been on missions in the French coal mines, same area that Van Gogh was in. And we had good rapport. He was had written a book on the search for God in the coal mines, how the people working there, leading very dangerous and monotonous and painful lives, were seeking for something, and somehow the seeking became even more naked or more prominent because of the poverty of their lives. And he was a catalyst to translating their own wishes to themselves, translating them into them, that what they were looking for was God, or something that could be called God. Anyhow, then there came the subject of my harmaline experiments and tigers and all those fancy images, and I mentioned that in Colombia sometimes shamans claim to turn into tigers, and they are regarded some emblematic of the tiger spirit. There's a lot in the language of the Yahe experience, the presence of the tiger as the sun, and this luminous spirit of the sun is very present. And so I mentioned that there was talk about shamans being hurt when a tiger is shot at. And so maybe it's a hallucinatory transformation of a person, of a shaman, into a tiger before the eyes of people who have taken ayahuasca, or yahe there. And then this man who had also been a missionary in Gabon tell me, oh, that's very much like the stories of witch doctors. Witch doctors are supposed to turn into lions. And I've heard the same story of a witch doctor being hurt by a bullet after this bullet is supposedly directed to a lion. That's what got me on the search. What is it that they take there? So I got some. I think the first Ibogaine I got was just pure Ibogaine. I don't remember the source, but I gave it to 30 people. That was my standard number for statistical purposes of comparison at the time. I was invited to the LSD conference organized by University of California in '67, I think it was. It was about 12 of us, I think. Tim Leary was invited, Ram Dass was invited, Allen Ginsberg was, and some more academic people like Houston Smith from MIT. Somebody was working on preparing people for death with LSD. And Frank Barron was there. Frank Barron was at Harvard the person who first gave the Mexican mushrooms to Tim Leary. And he was the head of that team, research team, from which Tim Leary and Dick Alpert were ousted. It was a very small number of us, and the organizer of this conference was Dick Baker, later known as the Baker Roshi, the successor of Suzuki Roshi at Tasahara. He had been appointed by University Extension to organize this conference. And I received this request through the telephone when I was in Chile, and I asked, could it be that I speak not of LSD, which is not what I have done more, or that is more original, but about Ibogaine, which is what I am involved in right now. And this was accepted. So I was the only one in the LSD conference who talked about Ibogaine. And since everybody was talking about the here and now, I talked about Ibogaine and the there and then. And I probably have at home somewhere the headlines of the following day of the conference, the first day. Ibogaine, the drug of the there and then, because of the possibility of re-elaborating, redigesting memories, traumatic episodes, and so on. I was my first subject. Okay. My experience was that I was in a borrowed house. I was in a season coming from America, like a holiday period in my time on a Guggenheim Fellowship, I think. Somebody lent me a beautiful house with birdsong and lawn, and not big like here, but small enclosed garden, many bougainvilleas. And at some point I felt like lying down. And after lying down, I felt as if the whole world was turning around me. And it was like a cosmic dance, a regularity of the orbits of all the celestial bodies. Of course, I was with eyes closed. But the sense was that there is a universal harmony, and I am at the center of everything. I'm not part of that dance. I'm holding on to myself, I'm holding on to something. And I have a sort of miserable life by not joining to this universal life. And part of me wants to be part of it, and part of me is afraid that if I turn the switch, so to say, if I say, let me be, let me let go and be part of everything in its wonderful intrinsic harmony. What if God wants me to be dust? what if I choose through that, to be nobody? I was not ready to be nobody. I was too self-important. And it happened as if there was a timing to the process of decision, as if I had my fingers for too long on the switch. And it was not granted that I have this opportunity. It was too much of a delayed yes. And from then on, and this was very illustrative for me, from then on it was Mickey Mouse. It was cartoons. Trivial cartoons, boring cartoons. It's a world of entertainment. So there was no way to come back. It was like as if I had lost my chance. I was not ready. And then the first person I gave Ibogaine to after this, taking the consideration of dosage from my experience, was a wonderful dancer, one of the best Chilean dancers of the time, who had had a lot of training in some oriental country, in Indonesia, I think. And for him, the experience was a blue light, a blue shaft of light. And everything was there, and all beauty was there, and he was very exuberant in what he saw and what he said about this blue light. And never again did I see an experience like that one. A celebration of pure light, blue. And then I started to see all kinds of things. It seemed to me that there was a lot of resemblance from the ayahuasca experience, or let's say the Harmaline experience, though I did in those times already begin to use what then came to be called pharmahuasca. I experimented with little different additions, also to Ibogaine. It seemed to me that it worked best with additives. There was the instinctual quality. There were images also, that type of archetype animal, but a little bit more turtles. More turtles, and it seemed to be still a lower world, more primeval than that of the ayahuasca animals. I distinctly saw that it was therapeutic for many people. Not always clear why, and this was similar to ayahuasca. Ayahuasca heals without going through understanding. It's as if it was a sort of lubricant of instinctual life. Everything becomes more natural. I think they're relatives, they're sort of cousins, just like the molecule has some relation. In the images, curiously, I saw more lions than jaguars under Ibogaine, and that's another mystery. Why? More turtles, crocodiles, some shift in images. More personal content also. Harmaline more not impersonal, archetypal. When it's images, it's not images. No, now I see myself in my childhood, but that with Ibogaine I just saw a lot of. Something like a similar taste, a similar quality runs across both. But I didn't go into experimenting with high dosages of Ibogaine. I was a passerby in Chile. I didn't want complications. I was not working at an institution. I was no longer at medical school as I had been years before. I didn't want people to cling to me because of unfinished situations. Like he wants to keep my freedom. So that limited my experimentation. Never went for a second's experience. Just one person, one experience. And I don't remember receiving people whose problem was an addiction explicitly or noticing it. So it was Slotsov who told me that he was interested in that, told me of his personal experience of healing. Well, I think we may define addiction as not only chemically related. Our ego is an addict, addicted to applause, addicted to comfort, addicted to distraction, addicted to reading, addicted to movies, addicted to all kinds of things. I think it's very true what Pascal said, that we have trouble in the world because we are all distracted. We are unable to stay quiet in our rooms. And we meddle with others, and we go out of ourselves compulsively in search for something that we're missing inside. So I think the key to that situation of needing less is finding oneself in some way, a greater sense of the core of one's being. People under Ibogaine didn't describe it as a mystery or coming into a mystical union. But I think it might have been decoded like that, like the experience of the blue light could have been spoken of as a blessing or as an energy representing the inner dimension. And I remember this sense of not needing food or water or anything, needlessness, because I was so full of radiance, full of life. So I think it has to do with that, with finding the inner treasure. And health. Oh, it's our sense of lack that makes us always be in the pursuit of something and wanting to fill up the void. This is what I did in groups mostly. I gave Ibogaine with different admixtures, and I collected written reports, and I never came to analyze the written reports. They were all handwritten, a little bit difficult to read sometimes. And I was lazy, or I was always overworked, and there came a time when it was now time to come to America because I had been granted a fellowship. So that remained in my mother's attic. I lost track of my own papers. But I can say two substances other than MDA, which I would not recommend, having seen that it does cause accidents. I think MDMA would be a good admixture, but I used DMMDA, extracted from Apiol. Sasha Shulgin had synthesized it. I had experimented with all the MMDA derivatives. There are 6 kinds of it. And also MMDA 3A seemed very appropriate. And I had a kind of honeymoon experience with Ibogaine and MMDA 3A, which was a wonderful sexual experience with no end, hours of continuation, and no need for orgasm. Always like a summit of plenitude. The same state of needlessness. Needlessness, but enjoyment. I became a prominent person in that conference, not through Ibogaine, but through the fact that when I was finishing my address at the lectern, or this, however it's called, this standing place for the lecturer, the door was opened in the back, and there was a hiss, or not a hiss, a rumor that let me know it was Allen Ginsberg, who had been invited and then disinvited to the conference because the authorities were afraid that this could attract too many of the young, problematic people. The conference had also been moved from Berkeley, where it was to be originally, to San Francisco Medical Center. And they wanted to keep it more academic. And in the meantime, Allen Ginsberg had been visiting the Senate, Capitol Hill, and giving his report on psychedelics to the senators, instructing them what it is like and why it should be allowed and not fought against. So he had that exciting to report, and he had been disinvited to the conference. And because I was a foreigner who was up there holding my space, I was the owner of that space at the moment when the door opened, so I invited him to come up, and I re-invited him on the basis of that fragile authority I had for that span of a few minutes. And there I met lots of, after the conference, he came up and asked me about whether I had known anything about the anti-addictive possibilities. I told him not. He gave me the address of the man in France who had the monopoly of the roots industry, Dominique Bauchet. You probably know him. Usine chimique d'Ivry-la-Bataille. I still remember, but I had a correspondence with him. We together patented the combination of Ibogaine and MDA, which might have been a dangerous combination had I known better. Today I would say Ibogaine MDMA, not MDA, not simply MDA, since it causes epileptic manifestations in some people without it being clear why, and not clear to predict. So I started some research on the combination of both, but I came back to live in the States, and my collaborators in Chile didn't continue. One of them had a brain stroke. I don't know what happened to the other one. I think he traveled to Europe, lost track of him. So I hoped that these people at the University of Chile I had introduced to Ibogaine would continue providing Bauchet with material for some further publication of, or documenting further the patent. That was the whole story. I came to America, and then I never did anything of this kind because my position was fragile.